I have a love for series that are, for lack of better words, edgy as hell. I'm a product of the 90s, born in 95 and raised in the 2000s. And because of that, I'm a modern day reformed emo nu metal warrior. I'll defend Limp Bizkit and rap rock until I die blasting Hawthorne Heights like a true sad boy. But for people like me, this generation of jean shorts, dyed scene hairstyles, Papa Roach and Crabcore Screamo spoke to us at the core with moody style, dark and angsty vibes, overly poetic fake deep writing, real teenager in the early 2010s type shit. I just covered Soul Eater a few months ago, and a large portion of that video is about how Nightmare Before Christmas altered an entire generation of kids that are all a part of this same 2000s era time period. And now in 2024, it's really interesting to see how far that type of aesthetic has come, both positively and otherwise. And right in the middle of this generational shift was a manga that dropped in 2011, it going on to run for a combined total of 7 years. And in that time frame, altering the mindsets of that same 2000s generation once again. It becoming a series that is well known for its edgy characters, violent battles, and beautiful art. Of course, this would be Tokyo Ghoul and its sequel series, Rhea, the dark seinen hit that from 2011 forward until even today has kept large parts of the manga community in a chokehold, and for really good reason. So for today's video, I want to dive into the brutal world of Tokyo Ghoul, and how despite its public appearance being known mostly for edgy scenes and wild artwork, it's still written with some of the sharpest and most poignant character writing that I've experienced in a long minute. So let's start off with the big brain behind the series, Sui Ishida, Weekly Young Jump, in the year 2014. Tokyo Ghoul officially began on September 8th in 2011, like I had said, running in Young Jump, a Shogakukan seinen magazine that has series like Kingdom, Real, Terraformars, Golden Kamuy, tons of big name titles with a large legacy. The manga itself running until September 18th of 2014. And immediately after that, a sequel titled Tokyo Ghoul Rhea began, running from October 16th of that same year and lasting another 4 years, officially ending on July 5th, 2018. During the publication time, both a prequel 1-volume manga titled Jack was released, as well as 4 light novels, them titled Days, Void, Past, and Quest, all taking place at different points in the series and featuring a random assortment of main characters. There was an anime adaptation that we'll talk about more later, a video game that's kinda ass, live action movies, and even a stage play. So between all of this, it's obvious that the series is somewhat popular, the manga itself having sold over 45 million copies worldwide as of 2021, and still being loudly talked about online, a giant beacon for emotional Twitter users to gather under and be full of angst together. Now, for myself, it's been a rocky road getting to this point, because my first exposure to the series was watching the anime back in 2015-ish? And dropping it before the first season was finished, but we'll talk more about that later. Now, after dropping the anime, I actually didn't read Tokyo Ghoul until 2019, and I loved it. Problem is, I didn't know that Rhea was the actual sequel, and didn't read it until just this last month or so. Hashtag oops. So my overall experience with the series has been a bit weird. But now that I'm on the other side of that tunnel, both parts fully read and finally understanding tons of things that I sure as fuck did not before, I absolutely believe that Tokyo Ghoul not only deserves its popularity, but the fact that it's kind of a meme online is crazy for how good those moments in context are. But before we dig into why I think it's not only worthy of all that praise, but possibly deserving of even more, let's take a step back and talk about the actual first chapter. The story of Ken Kaneki unfolding from here and following down a dark, insane path that destroys hundreds to thousands of people standing in its way. The setting is Tokyo. In this world, beneath the social surface that we humans all live and exist in, there's a secret race, a society that has to be kept hidden from the normal eyes of the world. The monstrous ghouls that live among us and straight up devour the flesh of humans, it being their only food source. A ghoul, based on almost any outward physical trait, looks and acts just like a normal human. They live daily lives like anyone else, have jobs, go to schools, hang out with friends, and start whole families. And once they are finally alone, take a bite out of a person or two so they can stay fed and full. Them having the ability to harden their blood cells into weapons that bust out of their skin on some superior Spider-Man type shit. Due to this overwhelming power that the ghouls have and their need to feed on humans for survival, the Commission of Counter Ghouls, called the CCG, was established to keep humanity safe and these violent ghouls suppressed, them designating parts of Tokyo into 23 separate wards, rating them based on danger levels and establishing bases in each to have officers stationed all around the city, creating a literal war in the shadows of the streets to keep this threat to humanity buried from the eyes of everyday citizens. And in this world of ghoulish monsters that live in plain sight is Ken Kaneki, a by all means normal ass dude. At the age of 19, he's a well-read college student who spends his free time hanging out with friends and burying his nose in books, often going to cafes so he can sip on some coffee while he reads. And in one of those cafes on an unassuming afternoon, a fairly attractive older lady named Rize approaches him to compliment his taste in books, them striking up a conversation and Kaneki quickly taking a liking to this woman. Her going out of the way to be very forward and ask him on a nighttime date. Which, look, if you can't see where this is going, I don't know what to tell you, but oh no, imagine that, when she gets him all alone, she's a whole ass ghoul ass. Her blasting a hardened tentacle out of her back and slamming Kaneki down. And like I had said, he's just a normal dude that's now faced with a supernatural horror. So all within an instant, he's pretty much become a fly caught in the spider's web, ready to become a meal to an unstoppable predator. All of a sudden, bam, a whole ass crane load of steel girders and paneling just happen, in big quotations, to crash down on top of them. The ghoul Rize dying from the impact and Kaneki being transferred to a local hospital, his life barely snatched back from death's hands by the doctors. Except, due to that impact on his body, he had to have some emergency organ transplants if he was gonna survive. And the only available candidate was that same ghoul Rize, meaning Kaneki is now full of ghoul organs. His one red eye awakening in the hospital to reveal the tragedy that would soon become his life. A human boy thrown into the ghoul's world against his will and eventually taking those changes he's been forced to endure and moving forward with the weight of society on his shoulders. So with that being said and the foundation for the series itself laid down, let's talk about the person behind the manga a bit first. A name that's legit become a worldwide staple for art and storytelling, it all being from the dude himself, Sui Ishida. Except, Sui Ishida is actually just a pen name. And despite them having plenty of interviews and social media pages, we don't even know if they are a guy, honestly, despite the most commonly used pronouns for Ishida being he or him. It's what I even use for a lot of this script. But just like with Kyu Hayashida, Paru Itagaki, and tons of other artists, I can't blame them one bit for keeping out of the spotlight. Let them cook in peace. Oh, and by the way, if you like this shit, comment, sub, do all that. My ass got laid off and we are struggling out here. So boost that algorithm, hit that Patreon like these cool ass people, and let's get back in there. So before even starting Tokyo Ghoul, based on the artwork I had seen online, the general design of Kaneki with his white hair and black fingernails, my immediate thought was, this author was absolutely born in the 80s, and goddamn if I wasn't right, because their ass was born in 86. Ishida spending their adolescent and teen years in the 90s to early 2000s, and bro, you can tell in almost every aspect of his work how influential that era was on him. Now, even as a kid, Ishida had the interest in both drawing and manga, but due to both his dad's rigidness and an accident of spilling some ink on the tatami mat pissing his mom off, he never had the courage to pick up the pen despite his obvious interest and talent. It wasn't until his college years, after he had left home and spent his daily life locked away playing video games, that he decided to try drawing again. At this point, his grades were awful. He had no interest in working a boring job that he didn't care about. Feel that, brother. And had all but given up, really. It wasn't always this way. As a kid, Ishida did study hard and participate in school activities, partially due to his parents' strictness. But it came to a point in his junior years when, after telling his father about how well he was doing in school, his dad lazily just said, "Keep it up," without much care in his voice, which ended up changing Ishida's entire mindset about his grades and schooling. Like, what's the point if this is the best reaction I get? And spiraled down into a pit of lethargy that he didn't break out of until finally putting his foot down, moving to Tokyo and becoming an assistant on Kingdom, which in his own words ended up being more of a hindrance than a help to the rest of the team, but learned so much about the manga world that he just hadn't seen before. Actually feeling the in-person level of passion a creator can infuse with their work. And it cemented the dream of wanting to run his own series. The original Tokyo Ghoul one-shot that followed, starring a way more punk and shitty Kaneki that was actually born a ghoul instead of being turned into one. The story being picked up by Weekly Young Jump, the same magazine Kingdom was in, and becoming Tokyo Ghoul. This childhood and lead into the manga industry is, at least I think, extremely important to both what Tokyo Ghoul is and who Ishida is as a writer and artist, showing that off in a growing scale through the pages of Tokyo Ghoul and on into Rhea. His art, combat, and writing shifting and changing with each volume to go from a fairly typical story of monsters living in plain sight to a philosophical commentary on racism, classism, and the idea of living with the life you were dealt, both the good and the bad. So, first up, before we dive deeper into that philosophical angle and get spoilery, let's talk now about what is probably the most famous aspect of Tokyo Ghoul, the thing that brought me to the manga in the first place and helped launch it to my top reads of all time, that being, of course, the artwork. Before finally taking the plunge to read the manga, I remember seeing certain shots of Tokyo Ghoul online, and despite dropping the anime and shitting on it like I had said, I couldn't just lie to myself and go, oh, it's not that cool looking, like, nah. Content of the manga aside, it was obvious that Ishida was a talented artist, and it's one of the main reasons that I eventually gave the manga a shot. The thing I didn't know at the time was that I had mostly been seeing panels from like the first 7 volumes, and almost none from Rhea, minus the, one big sad boy profile pic. And, it's no understatement to say that even though Ishida's art was already great in those early volumes, I had no idea that the level of growth he had across those 8 years of publication was so gigantic. Like, it's kind of astounding. When I was reading Ghoul originally, I remember thinking, damn, this art is great, and it was a feeling that never changed from start to end. But when you read a series chapter to chapter in a fairly short time, at least for me, I accidentally kinda glaze over that growth. Like, it gets a bit harder to see when a thing that took years for the artist to develop into takes me 3 weeks to read. But going back for this video, it's an eye-opening experience to see just how far his art came from those early pages of Kaneki learning about his new reality, all the way to some of the most beautiful, painful, and emotional manga shots I've ever seen. This paintbrush style is a massive part of the art. And from the start of Ghoul all the way until now, Ishida has been an all-digital artist, using Paint Tool SAI to create the brushstroke flair that both his characters and background art is drawn in. And in my head, between this and Hiroyuki Takei's current style, there's no bigger proof at just how valuable and fantastic digital artists, and by extension all digital manga, can be. Every volume as the series went on only increased the amount of details in a character's facial expression, their overall designs and outfit flair, the weapons they used, and the combat that backed them up. Ishida knowing how to balance both beauty and violence on a perfect scale that takes scenes and sways them between overwhelming emotion and brutal combat. When someone is happy, sad, angry, there's no words necessary on the page because Ishida has mastered the ability to express every single feeling a character can have through the sadness in their eyes, the tense muscles in their faces, the line work of a person in frame getting wild and frantic to match an explosion of emotion. There's a page towards the end of part 1 where investigator Sato is instructed to write out his will, since the next assignment him and the CCG have is likely a suicide mission. And as Sato spends that chapter with his family, taking in all the joy in his life, all he can think of in that moment is how he doesn't want to write this fucking will, how he doesn't want to die. And Ishida translates all that emotional impact through a double-page spread in the face of a man who's crumbling under an unfair and unmovable weight. The line work that makes his character up almost vibrating itself from overwhelming despair. A thing I've talked about in other videos, most recently a big part of Dorohedoro, is I absolutely adore art styles that focus heavily on scratchy line work. Like, the idea of uniformity in the lines drawn doesn't matter as much in this setting, and the art is meant to reflect the wild feeling the writing is putting down, a thing Ishida is not afraid to do in any parts of his art. It being complemented by a pretty common use of repeating dialogue to show a character's mental breakdown. Obviously, this is a trope that Japan uses a lot, characters saying things like "I can't run away" over and over because their language kind of makes sense for it phonetically, and Ishida fills his pages with this exact thing, letting you know when someone, usually Kaneki himself, is losing grip on sanity and falling into a pit in their minds. Between the battles, character art, and just the dialogue itself, the world of Tokyo Ghoul is filled with this scratchy, hectic art style that, while fitting the frantic and violent vibe the manga has, also leaves this specific artistic impression on me that feels both loose and intentful at the same time. Like the scene itself is breaking down with the character. The deep and obsessive shading throughout the manga so dark and extreme that it reminds me of something like Hellsing. The ghouls themselves being just like vampires, and both Kaneki and Alucard being basically the kings of the shadows. Small sidetrack I want to throw in somewhere, so this'll do. But there's actually a small Hunter x Hunter one-shot that was created by Ishida as a fan of the series. Him showing a potential childhood look into Hisoka and where he got both some of his circus tricks and the name Bungee Gum. It drawn in that sketchbook pencil style that Ishida is a master of, and I fucking love it so much. Another trait that runs through Tokyo Ghoul is the consistent use of pure white backgrounds in both major artistic scenes and the small emotional ones. This is something I've praised and defended back in my Bleach video and just as loudly on Twitter in general. Kubo is famous for his white backgrounds with teenage level deep poetic writing, and I love it just as much there as I do here. Ishida not being afraid of saying to hell with everything else in this room. What matters right here, right now are these two on page. How them and Ishida himself convey their emotions through expression and silence. People like to criticize this style and say it's lazy, but I don't give a shit at all when the art that's still on screen looks like this, or the writing itself is pulling that same weight. And you know, thinking about it while I'm typing this script out, his art is also like Kubo's in the way that, dude, it's just cool as shit. You have the overall character design choices, things like Kaneki's eye patch and masks in general, all ghouls wearing them to keep their actual faces hidden from the CCG agents, and those same agents wearing all white suits with long coats, them usually having assorted belts, straps, whatever, and called doves by the ghouls due to their bright white fits. But past that, the art itself just radiates an aura of coolness that I can't describe. Like, I catch myself going through these pages while still making this video, looking at shit like all of Uta's tattoos and saying, God damn, because Ishida's art just resonates with my soul, dude. And when it comes to that cool factor in the art, one of my favorite things is without a doubt the way Ishida creates color pages for the series, to which there are 2 separate art books worth of. In almost all of their colored works, you can see what is one of their biggest traits as an artist, the, like I said before, brushstroke style that feels so soft and ethereal. Like, despite how bloody and dark the pages of Tokyo Ghoul are, its color pages can reflect the exact opposite, with the cast stylized in beautiful and passionate ways. I mentioned earlier about how they do this all digitally, and it's with these color pages where I feel like you can see the total understanding Ishida has of drawing as a medium. The soft and wispy hair, and the passing glances the characters have, the random assortment of colored backgrounds, outfits, hair colors. Ishida has such a significant style, and they use it to create the same vibe that his writing has in the artwork itself. The core of both Tokyo Ghoul and seemingly Ishida being so passionately and beautifully displayed over and over with each painting. I mean, shit, you can see the art style really progress in the actual covers themselves, starting with the first few volumes just having white backgrounds and some well-drawn character art on the front. But with volume 7, Ishida said his attitude towards Tokyo Ghoul and manga in general was changing, pushing himself way harder than before to pump out high-quality art. The covers now having colorful and honestly beautiful designs that, in my opinion, make for one of the most consistent run of 10 out of 10 covers a manga series has ever had. Now, this wasn't without its long-term drawbacks, and we'll touch more on that later. But in both the color art and the actual pages of the manga, the biggest thing I think that translates the feeling of the characters to the reader is the consistent and masterful expressions and detailed faces that Ishida can draw. There's this page towards the end of part 2 where Tsukiyama, a character who's been known to have some wild and weird faces over the series, just breaks down in tears over the idea of someone he loves being denied happiness over and over. And due to Ishida's already strong understanding of how to translate emotion in his art that's just growing better and better every chapter, by the time you get to this point in Re, it's just absolutely beautiful to me, man. Like, I praised Oh Great in my Air Gear Cross Tenjo Tenge video for his mastery of facial expression and detail in his art, and in my eyes, Ishida is one of the few artists who can stand side by side with him in conveying those feelings to the reader. The beauty, the sadness, and anger of this harsh and destructive world always being right up in front of the action. The mental state of the cast being just as important, if not more so sometimes, to the combat of the series. Oh, and speaking of that, despite Ishida knowing when to pull back and let his characters breathe, he also knows when to throw them into fast-paced and violent action scenes. The bloody power of the ghouls and their CCG enemies filling the pages from volume 1 all the way to the finish line. Now, real shit, the battles in Tokyo Ghoul honestly caught me off guard at first. Based on the art style Ishida had, in my mind, I figured his fights would be more tell and not show. Like, big attacks do big damage and we move on to the next scene, like the actual combat aspect would be played down. which was the wrong-ass assumption to make. Despite the powers themselves being hardened blood cells busting from a user's body that form into all kinds of weird and fucked up forms, the fights in Tokyo Ghoul are straight up drag-out brawls of both dudes blasting total ass with abilities that can level buildings, and also just two people beating the dog shit out of each other on some real manly shit. The combat mixing together both wild and intimidating powers that can be hard countered by the user just getting his shit rocked. So in this world, people born as ghouls have something called a kakuho inside of them, an organ that doesn't exist in normal humans used to store RC cells, a fake blood cell that's shaped like a fetus, okay, them fueling a ghoul's body. Where ghouls need to consume humans for survival, these RC cells are generated from eating human flesh, and it's the only thing that satisfies both their hunger and nutrifies their bodies, meaning they have to be eating dudes to survive. They don't have a choice. Using these RC cells in the kakuho, ghouls blast hardened blood from their bodies to create what's called a kagune, it being both their main form of weapon and usually also a reflection of the ghoul themselves. These kagune vary in shape, size, function, ghouls using them to hunt down their food and defend themselves against the CCG, with there being 4 types of kagune that a ghoul can be born with, them called Ukaku, Kokaku, Rinkaku, and Bikaku. Now, I'll be honest here, each one of these names are meant to signify a difference in kagune type and actually differentiate the ghouls that use them. But I can't even act like I feel like this is a required thing for remembering in the fights. Like, don't get me wrong, it does separate the power types and give variation in the ghouls, some being better physical attackers while others shoot range blood blasts. But when a fight breaks out and you got claws tearing up the earth, bullets blasting battlefields apart, hardened arm blades, and many more wild powers, I personally feel like the user and what they can do with their specific kagune matters more than a general umbrella type term that something like Nin and Hunter x Hunter has. And on the opposite side from the ghouls and their RC cells, you have the CCG, who fight using briefcases called quinquays, God I hope that's the correct pronunciation, which are weapons created from harvested kakuho out of dead ghouls, meaning the investigators will kill a ghoul, rip its organs out, strap them into an electric briefcase to stimulate those organs into activation and use them against other ghouls. This being shown off early when investigator Mato literally uses 2 quinquay made from a little girl's dead parents on her, basically saying, hey, I ripped this out your mom's and your dad's and now I'ma hit you with it. So going by that description alone, you can probably tell these ghoul investigators are surely always the nice and correct guys. They also have supplemental Q bullets, which are exactly like they sound. Bullets made from kakuho that can be fired and do damage where regular bullets kind of aren't shit, meaning that even agents who aren't freak beast fighters like Juzo or Shinohara can keep up in a fight. Between the second-to-second kagune blasting battles and the large double-page spreads that show someone getting decimated by a finishing blow, the combat is always one of the most important parts of Tokyo Ghoul, the characters of the story existing in a non-stop war because of their extreme hatred for each other, combining together Ishida's beautiful artwork and extremely violent combat. They lay the major groundwork for what would make Tokyo Ghoul so popular with younger readers and catch the eyes of people like me online. But past that, the real heart of the series is absolutely found in Ishida's writing. The way he grows and changes both the characters and himself over the course of the story to its conclusion. And with that said, I want to take a look at the 2 major factions in Tokyo Ghoul, the ones I've been referring to so far the entire video. That being the CCG and their dedication to erasing the ghoul threat from society, and the ghouls themselves. A species that, due to the way they are born, a choice they have no say in, are hated and hunted, with them doing the same in return for both revenge and survival. But most importantly, how main character Ken Kaneki stands in between both of these worlds. humans. The half-ghoul, half-human who's fought on both sides of the battle. How the choices made through his life have led him to the point he stands at the end. So from here, it'll be full spoilers for a bit, so if you want to hear about the anime and stay unspoiled on everything, just jump to this time here. Cool? So going by the basic info I've provided through this description of ghouls so far, them literally needing to eat humans for survival, they naturally come off as villainous and antagonistic for completely understandable reasons. The CCG's ranks are filled with orphaned kids who lost their families to ghoul attacks. The organization raising them is soldier detectives that grow into hardened killers, wiping out ghouls with a righteous vengeance. So as both a main character and as a reader yourself, where would you stand? It seems pretty black and white, right? Obviously, that's not the case. No one asks to be born a ghoul, no one wants a life of killing just to stay alive. I've been reading a shitload of X-Men comics lately, and a large part of the entire foundation that series is built on is the fact that mutants are hated by normal humans, them going to extreme lengths over and over to suppress their rights and pin them down as a separate species. Obviously, this is meant to be an allegory for real race relations and LGBTQ struggles between the general public and people considered different by an arbitrary standard. Fucking Chris Claremont having Kitty Pryde drop the hard R 3 times in her way of saying, see, it's just as bad as saying mutie, which, But realistically, this comparison falls apart a bit when you think about the fact that the actual two things being compared are being black or having the power to control metal, read and destroy minds, be fucking Jean Grey. So the scales aren't exactly equal here. But with Tokyo Ghoul, the thing that takes it a step further and escalates this to a real and human level is that the story itself understands this gap. Humans are, without the use of Quinque, on a totally different level than a ghoul. They can't stand up to them in any real way and have no choice but to be food. There's no easy answer, no open bridge to cross, and this barrier tears down both the members of the CCG and the ghouls themselves, both losing the things they care about non-stop in an endless fight to, well, just fight really. Characters like Mado and Hinami, the former killing both of Hinami's parents and then trying to kill Hinami herself while using her parents' own Kagune, only to get his throat slit by Toka. Amon and Father Donato, the kid Amon being raised in love and happiness with his priestly caretaker in a church orphanage, only to find out the father he loved was a ghoul who ate the other kids, and is kinda implied to have been really cruel and yeah about it. Amon taken in by the CCG afterward and raised to be a special investigator since he knows the cruelty of ghouls firsthand. Juzo, the boy who was raised in the care of a violent and sadistic ghoul as a toy, a doll-like girl that, when Juzo was still a really young kid, abused and castrated them before being rescued by the CCG, later taken into the care of Inspector Shinohara and turning Juzo into a bit of a freak. The first time you meet him, bro tongues a dude's ear out. There's Toka and Ayato's dad, who to them was a loving father that did whatever he could to keep them both alive and happy, but outside of that was a binge eater who slaughtered recklessly to avenge his murdered wife, the CCG eventually hunting him down and dividing the siblings. There's tons of examples that show how both sides of this story are, in their own ways, correct or justified. The CCG is right to protect the citizens from violent ghoul attacks that plague the city, and the ghouls themselves are just as correct to seek vengeance for their loved ones being systematically slaughtered and forced into hiding by humanity for things they never had control of to begin with. And past the understandable parts of each argument, what do you do when both sides have their own darkness? What's right and what's wrong when the CCG, the group organized to protect humanity from ghouls, are creating half-ghoul detectives from volunteer teenagers using techniques developed by a literal Frankenstein-ass mad scientist, splicing genes like plants to make a one-eyed ghoul army? The organization's leadership itself possibly having a family connection to the ghouls? And then on the other side, when those same ghouls have organized into a whole-ass violent army that is taking over parts of the city, them pushing the CCG to their limits, meaning that general humanity is at risk, shouldn't they be contained and suppressed? And in the middle of this infinite struggle between the two sides that have their own justifications and morality, you have the half-ghoul Ken Kaneki, someone who is able to understand both sides of the battle. And what does that mean exactly? Well, first, let's break down the actual events he goes through in the series. Just follow me for a minute, I'm going somewhere with all of this. Throughout the manga, Kaneki's words from the first chapter come true in the most unfortunate of ways. Before the story even began, his mother had overworked herself to death and Kaneki was sent to live with an abusive aunt, him actually repressing the memories of his mom taking her anger from the overwork out on him. So he was already starting off kinda rough. 10 years later and after his ghoulification, the tragedy that he begins to live is one that, by all means, is the most unfair series of events in the world. Count Olaf has nothing on this shit. At first, it's a slow fall into sadness as Kaneki is forced to accept that he's gotta eat human flesh to survive now, that parts of humanity will always be hunting him, and that living in this life naturally means he may have to become a murderer, possibly killing a human with his own hands to protect his fellow ghouls. And all of this happening just because he wanted to take a hot older woman on a date. That struggle is hard enough, but then around volume 6 to 7, a time that, like I had said, is when Ishida wanted to take his drawing and writing to the next level, Kaneki is kidnapped and brutally tortured by the hockey-masked freak Jason, a ghoul who, after experiencing extreme torture from a CCG agent earlier in his life, developed a masochistic obsession with pain and death, ripping Kaneki apart while his ghoul organs keep healing him back up. Jason cracking his fingers with excitement and forcing Kaneki to count backwards from 1000 in intervals of 7 to keep from losing his mind. The experience changing Kaneki forever and creating that famous white hair sad boy we all know and love. His fingernails blackened from the blood hardened under his nails where Jason kept ripping them off. Between losing his humanity, his friends, and now going through one of the most traumatic experiences possible, it just breaks him. Kaneki has no choice but to accept that ghoul power he has inside, to accept that he himself is now a ghoul, losing all sense of well-being and throwing himself into fights, willing to tear his body up and give in to his darker ghoul urges to win. Spending 6 entire months cutting down rogue ghouls and eating their flesh instead of feeding on humans. Kaneki kept losing everything he cared about and was about to lose himself. He had no choice but to become the one who takes, to start fighting back at any cost. But despite his insane powers just growing and having a death wish mentality, it's not enough. He still loses his friends, he still isn't strong enough to defeat Arima, the CCG's famous Grim Reaper who has a body count ranging into the thousands. The investigator impaling Kaneki's eyes and taking the body, both ending the first 14 volumes of Ghoul and to start the next 16 of Rhea, the CCG brainwashes Kaneki into becoming Heisei Sasaki, a half-ghoul investigator that leads the Quinks Squad? A new group of half-ghouls created by the CCG to fight against the growing Aogiri tree threat, with Akira Yamaoka and Arima himself training and watching over Heisei. But of course, that emo-ass voice locked in the back of his head just gets louder. Kaneki eventually coming back to life and going like Grim Reaper mode, getting brutal as fuck so he can rescue his friends from prison and honestly, hopefully just finally die in peace. Except he remembers in his final moments that dying is lame as fuck, and after so many ups and downs, decides maybe living would be kinda cool actually. Finally becoming the fabled one-eyed king that's been talked about the whole ass story, and naming his group Da Goat, which is probably one of the funniest things of all time honestly. He even goes on to finally get with Toka, them having a chapter dedicated to their first time together and ends with Kaneki crying in her arms on some real gut shit, which to me, that's how you know your protag is a 10 out of 10. Her getting pregnant and going on to have a kid, Kaneki and Toka surviving the immense sadness their lives had been and getting married, eventually living together in happiness and coexistence with humans. Basically, happily ever after. So, all of that being said, it's obvious that Kaneki's life has, kinda sucked ass. At an incredibly young age, it was stolen from him. His humanity was stripped down and he was forced into living a painful existence that, by all means, just kept getting worse. It's been a life of sadness and loss, violence and death. And yet at the very end of his journey, he found love, he found a family, he found new friendships. He created a world that can possibly move to accept ghouls one day. Kaneki has, through choices that were originally not his to even make, lived through both extreme sadness and pure happiness. And when he looks back on the trip he took to the end, the torture, the fighting, and the crushing weight that he took on, he has no regrets. At the end of his story, he thanks Rize for turning him into a ghoul. He thanks Jason for his torture that made Kaneki accept having to be a ghoul. Understanding that even if these people did things that are, by all means, wrong, evil, and hateful, they led him to happiness, to a life that he felt was worth living. And I feel like this is the core philosophy at the center of both Tokyo Ghoul and possibly Ishida himself. Kaneki is a half ghoul, someone who didn't choose to become what he is, and lives at first in a way where he can't choose, where things happen to him and Kaneki just has to deal with it. He's trapped in a system where both sides, the ghouls and the CCG, are right and wrong, good and bad all at once together in a fucked up war that robs the happiness of everyone involved, where the idea of who's the hero and the villains can change based on who's killing who. That's when you have to look at yourself, the world around you, and decide on your own where you stand, no matter what's considered right or wrong. You have to accept the reality for what it is. Investigator Mato killed both of Hinami's parents, and Toka in turn killed him. By all means, Hinami, and by extension Toka, had the right to revenge. He was a Quinkwe freak that got off on killing ghouls. But that doesn't mean he wasn't a dad, that he didn't have a wife and a kid that he loved and cared for. The daughter Mato loving him back and not giving a shit that he orphaned ghoul kids with glee. Father Donato, like I had said, was an evil Catholic priest who seemingly did awful things to kids before eating them, even locking Amon in a cellar after getting caught by him. But despite the fact that his father is a figurative and literal monster, it's still Amon's dad. Juzo went through hellish torture as a young kid from a person calling themselves their mother, and doting on them like a fucked up porcelain child. And even as Juzo struggles through life, forever altered by those events with the world looking down on them, they can still look back on the Madame Ghoul as their parent, with some form of acceptance. It's stories like these, characters who are standing in the middle of love and hatred, that make up almost the entire cast of Tokyo Ghoul, them having to choose between the people that they love and what's right. Amon loves the father, and despite all of their happy memories together, still kills him with tears in his eyes. Juzo can't help but thank their mother for setting them on the path they are now, leading to meeting Shinohara and having a loyal squad of sick-ass killers. And in some of the smartest words in the series, Toka thinks about her dad, how he was so loving and careful with her and Ayato, but secretly was a mass murderer that ate for power. And honestly, even if he was her dad, Toka thinks he was a total dumbass for it, and that he deserved what he got. He made the stupid choice that cost him his life, and now years later, Toka and Hinami make their choice to forgive Mato, the guy who killed both of their parents through his daughter. Amon chooses to love his dad while also striking him down. Juzo chose to thank the madam while blowing her away. Even if we are forced into a hellish reality that isn't fair to us, we can choose to accept and overcome, and that choice itself is what matters. This concept of choice, of growth and living your life in the moment for yourself, is something that runs through almost every major character in Tokyo Ghoul, both positively and negatively. Going into Rhea from the first 14 volumes of Ghoul, I'll admit I was a bit caught off guard by the crazy amount of new characters that are introduced. Between the Quink Squad, new investigators and ghouls, and the time-skipped advancements of the main cast, I was kinda nervous about how these brand new people introduced halfway in a story can develop like Kaneki or Tsukiyama could. But between new players like Uri, Mutsuki, and Furuta, mixed with the continual development of characters like Arima, Amon, and Sato, the progression throughout both Ghoul and Rhea are some of the strongest things for almost anyone involved. Uri is a perfect example of this, the temperamental shit kid who speaks with his inner dialogue below his words, and telling his true thoughts since he's usually full of shit when he speaks, walking a long road from blaming the world around him for tragedy in his life, losing his dad to a ghoul at a young age, growing up into a selfish and brazen asshole that lives only to serve himself, then going all the way to an extremely competent squad leader that is willing to throw himself into harm's way to protect people he cares about, making the choice to look past what would progress him further in the world and instead live life with his squad, people he once looked down on and now considers them family. He understands that it was no one's fault he lost his dad when he was a kid. That's unfortunately just the way of the world they lived in. Something that he has to accept and make the choice to move on from, to grow from. Life as a whole is a series of choices, ones that we make kinda unconsciously most of the time. Grabbing some food on the way to work, staying up late to watch a bit more TV. Everything we do is a choice that affects whatever is next. And sometimes we make bad choices. We make the wrong choice. We choose plan B instead of A, and it turned out A was the road to success and B was a fuck up. But the hardest part of life is accepting those choices, and accepting that there's no way we can describe some of those choices as fair or unfair. They just are what they are. All we can do as people is choose what's next, keep choosing for ourselves and hope that at the end of our choices, happiness is waiting. Back in 2009, 2 years before Ishida started Tokyo Ghoul, they wrote a diary entry that was published in the final volume of Rhea. The entry itself talking about how he was living alone here in Tokyo, reflecting on the choices he made that got him there. Goofing off in college, playing video games, and now submitting storyboards to Shueisha in hopes of becoming a manga artist one day, with nothing else really to show for himself. But he wasn't dejected. He wasn't upset that he currently had no grounded direction. He accepted and embraced the choices he made, the mistakes and the slip-ups, both the fair and the unfair, because they got him to where he was now, going on a few years later to become one of the biggest manga sensations of the 2010s. All because he chose to go to Tokyo, he chose to go against his parents and draw manga. He chose that path that he wanted. This really resonated with me at this time in my life. Like I offhand mentioned earlier, I lost my job of over 10 years recently and shit's kinda scary, dude. My future as of now is both completely open and totally uncertain. But, you know, I'm here and I'm choosing to keep pushing forward, to keep making these videos and to grind even if there's no big incentive or payoff. Because it's my choice, it's what I like and what I want to do. The world fucking sucks, dude, and it's not getting any better with time, but it is what it is, I guess, you know? It's my life, it's all me out here, and just like with Ishida and Kaneki, I'll choose the path I want to walk and accept whatever might happen, remembering my losses and just counting up my wins. Oh, and one last thing before the anime discussion, but I just want to shout out how Kaneki has kinda become one of my favorite protagonists due to this read-through and whole video making process. For as edgy, extreme, and sometimes self-righteous as he can be, he's just extremely relatable, like bro is willing to kill himself for the ones he loves, and then grows into realizing that he should live for the ones he loves, all while consistently having some of the most dope-ass designs and moments throughout the manga. Like, there's a reason he calls his group the GOAT, because he is, bitch. He's selfish in a way. He admits that he only fights for ghouls because the people he himself loves happen to be ghouls. So he would fight to save an entire species just for the sake of the people he cares about. He takes on the infinite trauma of life and just coexists with it, eventually even accepting it, cracking his fingers just like the ghoul Jason who tortured him, because even during an experience like that, Kaneki was able to absorb something from it and make the choice to grow from it, refusing to even kill Jason and actually make himself a murderer, still holding on to his dignity after Jason tried to take it from him. I get why people can look at Tokyo Ghoul and turn their nose from a glance at how edgy and overly serious it can look, and sure, sometimes it totally fucking is. But that's not to say it doesn't have real heart and soul to it, that the violence and sadness aren't backed up with hope and happiness, and Kaneki reflects that perfect duality that is Tokyo Ghoul in general, both angry and happy, both sad and sweet. I know in recent years, Ishida has said in an interview that he didn't consider Tokyo Ghoul a success, not in terms of sales or popularity, but more so as an artwork itself. And I feel like that kind of makes sense in a way. You can tell a large part of Re is Ishida exploring concepts of nihilism and trauma, both of sadness and anger, and that can really take a toll on people, especially the one creating it. The final pages of Re say clear as water that back around volume 7, like I had said, Ishida began to push harder and harder, damaging their health for most of the series' duration and honestly, sucking any joy that they were getting from creating Tokyo Ghoul. So it's no wonder that he could look back on this whole experience with tainted feelings, despite it having such massive success and fame. But I don't think that's really a bad thing. I don't think it's wrong to look at something you've created and feel a sense of detachment from it. Shit, I feel that about some of my videos. But, like with my videos and people who enjoy them, and Tokyo Ghoul with me and the millions more, it still spoke to people. It still made them happy, sad, angry, or thankful. And sometimes that's more than enough to a creator. And I hope Ishida can feel that way too. Oh, and if you use that interview quote as a chance to shit on the ending of Re because you didn't really dig it, you're a loser and also smell. Anyway, all of that philosophical and metaphysical shit aside, like I had said earlier, there's still the anime, so let's talk about that now, I guess. The Tokyo Ghoul anime was released between July and September of 2014. Running for 12 total episodes and eventually getting a second season that also ran for 12. Going from January to March in 2015 the following year. The series was produced by Studio Pierrot, the gang known for things like Yu Yu Hakusho and Bleach, with Shuhei Morita on lead direction. While Morita's list of productions in the industry is relatively smaller, almost all of them are extremely interesting in one way or another. His short animation called Possessions even winning an Academy Award. Besides that, you had Kazuhiro Miwa on lead animation and character design, whose record in the industry is extremely varied and extensive. Go peep his credits, that list goes on for a while. Most notably to fans possibly, you had Unravel by TK from the Japanese rock group Ring Toshite Sigure, one of the most significant and famous anime OPs from the mid-2010s. And for a good reason, it's a banger. So with this honestly solid list of things for a first impression, it's no secret at all to say that the anime, for a large majority, was kind of hated by the fans. And for a list of reasons. So to continue that backstory with the anime and myself, back in like 2015 or so when I had actually watched a few episodes of that first season, I think I got to where Kaneki met Nishiki if I remember right. And I dropped it pretty fast because in my mind, it was just a generic vampire-esque series that in my eyes wasn't bringing anything new to the table. Now at this point, Tokyo Ghoul's manga was still running and internet conversation was usually praiseful of the series. But I had missed the detail that people were praising the manga only, not the anime, and decided for myself to move on with something else after that disappointment. Eventually, years later, I learned that I was wrong and the anime was largely disliked worldwide, and that the manga was where the real heat was, which led me to reading it that first time in 2019 like I had mentioned earlier. And yeah, it blew the anime out of the water from minute 0. But now, in 2024, I've gone back and rewatched large chunks of the anime and accepted it for what it is, with my updated thoughts being, still pretty rough. There's all the common complaints most people have, the censorship I think being the biggest one, and they aren't wrong. The pacing is off, the characters themselves feel like they're missing a level of depth in their writing. And like I had said, the censorship was just the worst. Now, in my opinion, that complaint is lesser here in 2024. You can find the uncensored episodes pretty easily now, but for a first impression, it's a big letdown. Remember the Terraformars anime? This shit was unacceptable when it aired. The anime itself was already mid, but was a guaranteed flop after this. And that mindset carried for most people into Ghoul. But these things aside, that first season really does have some moments of animation that are fantastic. Some aesthetic shots that match the painted quality of Ishida's art, and just overall really smart color design. I love the energetic flow that Kagune have when they pop them off. And the final fight between Kaneki and Jason was super well done. I can't act like Unravel playing didn't get me a bit hyped up in that moment. But those higher highs can't save an overall lackluster adaptation that just rushes through certain manga content while expecting to hit that same emotional beat. People have posted side-by-side manga and anime comparisons for years now, and yeah, sometimes that can be a reductive way to think about adapted anime. Not everything has to be one-to-one or flow in the same way, but I can't even act like these moments stack up to anything Ishida created in the manga. And after that, the second season, called Route A for some goof-ass reason and styled like this, apparently it's meant to be the root of the Aogiri tree, which is dumb, and this season is even worse than 1. It partially adapting manga content while going in its own direction with alternate plot beats for another 12 episodes. And both the general animation and direction just seem so lackluster compared to season 1. A large part of the online fanbase finally hitting their tipping point and just giving up on the anime. So, seeing as how poorly received those first 2 seasons were, the pressure is on for the adaptation of Rhea, so surely the studio could grab that steering wheel and bring it back on track, right? Fuck you. Rhea Season 1 dropped shortly after the end of Ghoul Season 2 with a big ass thud, and while they do straight up ignore the whole ass changes in Route A and begin to follow the manga again, the general animation and pacing just continued to get worse, adapting dozens of chapters within just 12 episodes before slowing down a bit in the final 12-second season. But it was already way too late by that point to salvage this series in animated form, so as dismissive and harsh as it sounds to say, I legit think past season 1 of the anime, there's almost nothing of value to be found here. I know this isn't a hot take or groundbreaking new views on the anime, but it's extremely disappointing that a series as beloved as Tokyo Ghoul will always have that barrier in front of it that turns people away. I mean shit, it did to me all of those years ago. At least Unravel still whips ass. Oh, and adding this part in now here at the very last minute, but recently a 10th anniversary website for the anime was created with more news to come. Fans, of course, are wanting this to be a Tokyo Ghoul Brotherhood situation, but I don't know if we would be that lucky, so as of now, what we got is what we got. Alright, so before we wrap up here, there's the final 2 things I want to mention. Those being how you can read/watch the series in 2024, and what's Ishida been up to since the ending of Rhea? Well, on that first one, thankfully due to its big popularity, both Ghoul and Rhea have full English printings under Viz's signature line. them costing a bit more than a regular volume but being slightly bigger, including color pages, and usually being fully uncensored. The printing itself is solid quality in my opinion. It's how I've read the series for this video, and I'm glad to have them both on my shelf. Viz has released 2 full box sets for both the first 14 volumes of Ghoul and then the 16 of Rhea, and they go on sale all the time at big discounts, so if you're interested, just keep an eye out. I got this box for like $60 to $70 on Amazon one day years ago. They also have full digital releases as well, obviously been showing off some of it in this video if that's your thing. As for the anime, both of the first 2 seasons and Rhea are all on Crunchyroll to stream, but they are the censored version, so watch at your own risk. Besides that, both have full uncensored Blu-ray releases you can buy online if you're really craving owning them for some reason. But that aside, you have Ishida's current manga that's been running since 2021, titled Chojin X, the story following superpowered beings that live in the shadows of society. Sounds familiar. And I haven't read any of it. Yeah, like I've said before, I prefer to read series once they're fully complete, and where Chojin X has art like this and Ishida's usual fantastic writing, I'ma just let him cook and come around with a plate when it's wrapping up. It already has an English release by Viz, same situation as the Tokyo Ghoul release. Signature printing, color pages, price increase, the works. Looks like this, people say it's good, so I'm glad to have a nice present to open one day way down the line. Thanks for watching, hit the Patreon like these cool ass people and drop some subs, likes, all that shit. It's always appreciated, especially with the whole job thing. I guess if there's any takeaway from this video, it's that life can suck ass, dude, but hey, we gotta keep pushing, right? You never know what might be waiting for you right on that other side. So for this moment, I'ma just chill, play more FF Rebirth, and try and enjoy life. See you next time with either an anime video on a very long-running franchise that I love, or a manga that I love just as much. I'll figure it out. Later!